Welcome to episode 391 of the Reformed Brotherhood. I'm Jesse.
And I'm Tony, and we are proud members of the Society of Reformed Podcast.
As the sky comes falling down for you, there's nothing in this world I wouldn't do.
Hey, brother.
Hey, brother. I'd like to start with some kind of retraction, maybe more appropriately an apology to our listeners. I just get excited sometimes when we start the episodes, and I realize the voice that everybody heard, I just came in hot. It was purely like a radio voice. Like nobody's ever probably heard me speak that way in normal conversation, but you've just got to get excited when you start a podcast. Maybe people don't realize that we have like different voices, right? I mean, we talked about this before, but my podcasting voice just came out there. And you know what? Actually, sorry, not sorry. You're welcome.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to fix the audio here. For some reason, you're like wicked quiet on the audio.
Was it the radio voice?
It might have been. You were doing the NPR voice?
Yeah. Well, no, it's probably like the opposite of the NPR. It's like the excited, like 1930s voice, like, whatever the equivalent is of like voice ragtime. That's, I think, what I just did there was like the welcome to. So,
like the Bob Barker voice?
I guess kind of. What's your impression of the Bob Barker voice?
I guess I don't know. I'm just thinking that The Price is Right is like a super exciting show, so he must have most of the time.
That's true. So I have to say this is like neither in affirmation nor denial territory. By the way, we're still doing the Scots Confession. Okay, back to this conversation. So what my wife and I joke about all the time is she enjoys watching this show. I'm sure people are familiar with it. It's called The Voice. Have you heard of this? Singing competition. So like I think worldwide these days, the whole premise is these celebrity panel of judges, their backs are to the people auditioning. So theoretically, all they have to go on to judge the person is just the quality of voice, not how they look, not their vibe, just that pure voice. And in the US, it's hosted by this person called Carson Daly, who has like a history in MTV and otherwise. He's been like a VJ, he's been a host of various things. But I always like to joke that in that show, there's an opportunity if one coach, somebody who selected one of the contestants, if they decide that they don't want to bring them back onto their team, another coach, one of these celebrity judges, can basically steal them.
Right.
And I always think this is the best day in his entire life for Carson Daly, because the way in which he communicates that he has this like sheer unbridled joy when he gets to announce that there's been a steal. And it always goes something like this: "We've got a steal!" Like it's like this most like epic voice. So I feel like I kind of did that a little bit at the start of this episode. So that's like a really long way of saying everybody has different voices, and that's okay. And Carson Daly, like I've never seen somebody more humanly excited and full of joy than when he gets to announce a steal has taken place on The Voice.
I feel like you can't be a judge or a not a judge. You can't be MC, whatever you would call Carson, the host of the show, I guess. You can't be that guy for that kind of show if you don't have that voice. Like whether it's America's Got Talent or American Idol or whatever it might be, you have to have that gear where you just kick into like super high gear.
Yeah, like maybe he's been coached. And so I'm actually what I'm critiquing him on, he's been like, listen, I honed that. I've crafted that voice so that when a steal happens, the audience is spellbound. They come immediately. They lean into. They are completely absorbed with and overwhelmed by everything that's just happened because I said it in this way.
I think he's probably just really excited. I think he just really likes it.
That's what I'm saying. He's just really, really enjoyed it. By the way, one other little piece that's like behind the curtain here is you and I were not often in the same room, unfortunately. So we record via the internet so we can see each other. And the method by which we're recording, the way in which we see each other, just told me that it was automatically reducing my voice because it was too loud. How dare you?
I thought that I welcomed our AI overlords, but apparently they went too far on this one.
Yeah, they've just taken over. So speaking of, let's take it back. Take the power back. So this is for the people. This is for the listeners. Let's do affirmations and denials. Again, we'll get the Scots Confession in just a second here. And by second, I mean 30 minutes. So let's go ahead and start with, what are you affirming with on this 391st episode?
Yeah. So I don't know how long this website has existed, and part of why I don't know how long it's existed is the nature of the website. I'm affirming the website clearlyreformed.org, so CLEARLY reformed.org. This is the podcast, the blogging platform article repository. I almost said article suppository, but that sounds like something different. You can take that article. Anyway, this is the article repository of Kevin DeYoung, who I have a ton of respect for. I mean, I think Kevin DeYoung is great. He's sharp. We don't agree on everything. I mean, there's nobody that we agree with everything that they say or do. What's nice about this is Kevin's own blogging platform. So Kevin writes for a lot of different groups. You know, Gospel Coalition, Reformation 21, all these different groups that he writes for. But Clearly Reformed is his own. So it's really more, not that he's overly restricted on other sites, but you know, the Gospel Coalition has a flavor, and I don't really like that flavor. And when he writes for the Gospel Coalition, he kind of has to have the Gospel Coalition flavor. That's how it works. But this is definitely like all Kevin. So you don't have to worry about like some of the other kinds of stuff that happens and the associations. And this is another thing that I really like. He actually reads his articles out loud on a podcast called the Clearly Reformed Podcast, which I think it should be legally mandatory that if you're going to publish an ebook or an audio version of your article, you should have to read it yourself. I just really like it when an author reads his own or her own audiobooks. I think it adds something to it. They're closer to understanding what the nuance is and the intonation was supposed to be than some other person reading the book. So I really like that. So clearlyreformed.org. The reason I say like it's hard to tell when this website exists is because not only is it all of the stuff that he's written, but he also like imported all the stuff that he's written for other platforms for I don't know if it's the whole duration of his career, but for like a large portion of his blogging career. So clearlyreformed.org, there's a ton of good articles, really good resource. And Kevin's just such a sharp, clear, Reformed thinker that although I don't agree with him on everything, I don't think we're in the same spot on like political theory and some of the more auxiliary stuff. He makes a good argument, and he is always winsome in the right way, like winsome in not a soft way, but winsome in a firm way. He can be firm and direct and sort of cutting, but not in a way that is unnecessarily mean or harsh, which I think is a really important kind of skill.
This is a great affirmation because I've pulled up Clearly Reformed right here, and this is like pure KD right here.
Yeah.
Like, you're right. It's kind of unvarnished. Not that he is in some way restricted or constrained, but I'm just loving the variety of things that are on here that he's written. And you can tell that for many of these things, they come directly from his own interest or own experience. Right. In addition to, of course, being connected, like you said, with many of the organizations who've asked him to write. So here you're getting, I would say, kind of his own perspective on so many things, but like the breadth and scope of topics is like pretty impressive, actually. Yeah. So this is a deep cut. I really like this. I'm going to be checking this out and reading some of these things. It's almost like a great way, if you like Kevin DeYoung, to get all the things he's writing in addition to the things that maybe he's just writing for himself or that have like personal interest. So that is pretty special.
Yeah. Yeah. And the podcast is great too, because like I said, he reads it himself. So there's an element of the intonation and the knowledge of what the author was thinking that another reader or like Matter can translate words directly to audio, but you don't get the intonation the same way. So check out the podcast, check out the blog. And you're right. I think Kevin writes, when you write for one of these big conglomerate article groups like the Gospel Coalition, you're not necessarily being like editorialized in terms of like you can write this, you can't write that, but you're being editorialized and like you're usually given a topic or a broad range of topics, and there is editorial oversight, which isn't a bad thing. Editorial oversight is a good thing in most cases, although the Gospel Coalition's editorial oversight is terrible, but it's not a bad thing. But Kevin is his own editor on Clearly Reformed. So you're getting his thoughts, what he wants to write about, what he thinks is important, without the other considerations that that are not good or bad, but the other considerations that come along with something like Gospel Coalition or even Reformation 21. I write for Reformation 21 from time to time. Like it's not that I'm opposed to those kinds of organizations and the blogging, I don't know what to call them, ministries or activities or whatever, but this is his own thoughts in his own format. So yeah, check it out. Clearly Reformed. It's hard to say that. It's hard to say clearlyreformed.org, and it's not .org, is it? Clearlyreformed.com. I'm just going to pull it up and just remember it. Clearlyreformed.org.
Yes.
Yes.
You got it. Yeah. And the last thing I'll say is one of the great advantages of this website is it's multimedia. So you've got lectures, podcasts, sermons, articles. So it really is all inclusive of all the stuff he's doing.
Yeah.
So again, if you're a fan, and even if you're not, I like this. I did not know this existed. So I don't know when this came into being, but obviously it's genius to bring all this stuff together. And then, of course, like you said, to provide a venue for him to just write what he would like to write about, which of course doesn't say he's not writing about that stuff for other places, but it's always great to do stuff for yourself, which is kind of like the opposite experience of this podcast. We've never really done something for anybody else except for us.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. So what about you? What are you affirming tonight?
All right. So let me give you a quick question. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer to this, but I'm thinking of an organization. I'm just going to give you the initials of that organization. You tell me how you would know or state or explain that organization, like what you would call it. So if I just said it was A, what would you call that?
AAA.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So I'm affirming AAA, but I have to say that in the place in which I live, this geographic, strange location, this foreign land, as it were, I've heard people call it the 3 A's. Have you ever heard that before?
I have not. You live in a weird place, my friend.
So I'm affirming with AAA, which is a company that's for a small annual fee. You can defer or allay some of the risk associated with your vehicle so that if you get stranded or you have a bad battery or something like that, you can call them up and they will come take care of you, which is part of what happened to me today, but is also part of my denial. So I'm going to be purposely withholding, which is the opposite of what happens on clearlyreformed.org from Kevin DeYoung. But I think like it's worth it. I really do. Like the peace of mind there, like again, so I just recently became aware that like in our chat, the chat devoted to like people who are listening and tracking with Reformed Brotherhood, that is t.me/Reformed Brotherhood, that somebody had actually created a bingo card, which I challenge people to do, which is basically like, what are the things that we say all the time that would be like really great so that you could have a game out of like, hey, if we lay all these things in a piece of paper, we can connect them all together and like horizontally, vertically, like diagonally. And I saw on that, it was honestly humiliating because I saw on that like all the things that you and I say all the time, which of course we know we say some of the same things, but like it just seemed like, okay, so I'm not alone. Everybody's actually realizing I said that a lot. So one of those phrases was "what a time to be alive." And I just got to lean into that again for this episode. Like the fact that you can like in many cultures transfer some of your risk by paying somebody to basically take it on for yourself so that when you need somebody, they show up. Like that's kind of a miraculous thing. It is an amazing thing. It's a transactional thing, but the fact that the infrastructure exists so that if you have like battery problems or your car breaks down, you just call somebody and within a reasonable period of time, they show up to help you when normally that might cost an incredible amount.
Yeah.
Is still awesome. So I've had several experiences with what I would call AAA. Some people call it the 3 A's. And they're fantastic. Customer service is amazing. Technology is amazing. The app is incredible. So responsive and accountable. They want to make sure you have a good experience. And it's at a point in time where you're super vulnerable because likely you're stranded somewhere. Yeah. So if you can get AAA, highly recommend it, if only for the peace of mind.
Yeah. And you know, you get a lot of like discounts places if you're a AAA member. So a lot of times just the cost of membership is easily recuperated by utilizing the various discounts. So I remember, did you guys probably didn't road trip a lot when you were younger because your dad was a pastor. So like you had to be in place. Yeah. So we would my family would road trip a lot. So we would go on, not like cross country road trips, although technically cross country, but we would very typically at least twice or 3 times a year, we would drive down the Mississippi River, from Minneapolis, where I'm from, to New Orleans.
Nice.
And I remember distinctly the various questions that would come in when we would stop in a motel, and one of them was always, "Are you a AAA member?" And then
Yeah.
we would
Right.
go to play. We would go to a museum or an art place or somebody like a tourist attraction on the way, and the question was always, "Are you a AAA member?" And a lot of times we would get discounts for that. So it's not usually that expensive every year. It's not a huge premium that you pay to have these services. And if you're diligent about making use of the discounts, you can easily like recuperate those funds pretty fast.
Agreed. That's a good point. It's kind of a little bit undervalued. Like it's in a bear market. It's a neat thing to have. So funny you say that because recently we had to book a hotel room for some unexpected travel, and the discount was greater than like the senior citizen
Yeah.
discount just by AAA. So it is wild. I mean, it's all partnerships. Everybody's getting something for something, but it is worthwhile. But if you travel to any degree, I think it's actually worthwhile. And of course, like sometimes people misunderstand these relationships. Like even with like maybe car insurance, you'll feel like, well, why do we pay all this money? We didn't have an accident. The whole point is that you have a peace of mind. You're
Right.
transferring or laying the risk.
Yeah.
And so that's really worthwhile. I'm happy to do that. And as will be heard later in my denial, it did in fact come in handy.
Yeah. What I remember the most about AAA, and these are weird fond memories that are like, it shows me how much of an inflection point in technology our lifespan actually has covered.
Yeah.
When we would do these road trips, I would remember my dad would have to go to a physical office
Yes.
and would have to sit down with someone and tell them, here is where we're planning on going.
Triptychs.
Yep. And they would print out these things called triptychs, which were basically like analog GPS, where like
Yes.
they would highlight the thing. You would tell them where you think you're planning on stop. They would put little stars where there's hotels. It was like there were probably a lot of people that lost their jobs making triptychs when Google Maps came out or when GPS was invented. But yeah, I mean, AAA is it's not just an insurance program for like roadside assistance. There's a lot more that comes with it. So yeah, we're not sponsored by AAA or we're not sponsored by the
wish we were.
3As. I feel like my denial needs to shift to calling it the AAAs, but maybe we'll defer that for a different day. I've never heard of that in my life, and that's insanity.
Yeah, I have a neighbor who calls it the 3As. He'll be like, I was just at the 3As, or of course, I got a discount from the 3As. And at first I was like, well, I know like the 2As. Like that's where my mind was at. So I was like, what is the third A that you're talking
Yeah.
about? So eventually we came to a common understanding, but it did take some time. So what are you denying against then?
So this is related to my denial from last week of buying a home and all the weirdness that comes with like contracts and stuff. I'm just denying like moving. Moving is the worst. It's just the worst. I didn't even know that there was this Reformed Brotherhood bingo card, which would have been really fun to see, mostly because I've spent the last week packing up my life and moving it across town.
Yeah.
And it's just the worst. And it'll be done soon, and it hopefully we won't have to do it for another number of years, but man, it stinks. It's just the worst.
It's tough. I was commiserating with you and talking to my wife earlier today and saying like moving is hard no matter what. Full stop.
Yeah.
Period. It's just challenging. It's stressful because there's lots of moving pieces, no pun intended.
Yeah.
But also, of course, it is that you're trying to take all of who you are with respect to your belongings and literally transport them to another place. And that's just a reflection. Actually, I was thinking that it's hard, like no matter who you are and no matter where you are, no matter where you are in like culture or history. I was actually just thinking today of, God's people moving through time. Like, of course, like just bringing the Israelites out of Egypt was a massive undertaking.
Yeah.
This is like partly why they were identified, that God identified them by being brought out of slavery. And of course, like your move presumably is not being brought from slavery into freedom. Of course, like there's lots of spiritual connections we can draw there. Maybe not necessarily in your crosstown move, but this is exactly what God does for us. But I was thinking about, moving is always horrible. And then I was thinking about Jacob. And I was like, well, at least like when you move, you're not worried your brother's going to kill you when you show up.
Or your father-in-law is going to kill you. I mean, he was
Right
caught
on.
between two rough spots. Yeah, I mean, I think like you don't realize how dependent you are on like a few specific things.
Yes.
until like you realize you've got 15 boxes and you're not sure which one it's in. Like
Right.
literally last night. So this will be our second night in our new home, which we're super, super happy about. I don't want this to come across as like we're not thrilled for God's provision. We absolutely are. But like last night we're trying to get ready to go to bed and it's like, I don't know which box my underwear is in. And like, I don't know which box the soap is in or the shampoo is. I don't need shampoo because I don't have any
Which
hair.
did you find? That's the question.
I will leave that to the listener's imagination. No. We found what we needed, but like it takes you twice as long. Or even tonight, like we normally record at a particular time, and I made Jesse wait like 30 minutes because I had left the piece of recording equipment that I needed and the cable I needed. I left that at my old place. So like even little things like, do I have the right cable to record a podcast? Do I have the
Right.
charger for my phone? Do I have the charging cable for my computer? Those little things. Like today we were up at the church. This is the first time in over a decade that Ashley and I have had to like go somewhere to go to church because we've just lived at the church. Like we left Augie's shoes at the church because they were wet. And like I had to go back to get his shoes. So like it's these little things you don't think about and you don't really recognize. And it's just the worst. It's the worst. It's over quick.
Process.
In an ideal situation, it's over quick, but it's frustrating.
It's still, and of course, like no unpacking happens all at once. So even if you have a move where you do it all in one day and you move everything, all your belongings to one place,
Yeah.
that's still a process of taking them out, placing them. It's a whole thing. But also, sometimes I think this come across as like, well, if you just have a lot of things, we have a lot of things, but all of the things are essential to life, just the bare necessities, those basic principle things. It just takes time. And of course, you're getting settled in a new location and environment, and you're trying to organize all that stuff. So if you have children, that's compounded, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's just an incredible adventure. So I'm with you. It's not ideal. This is why I think like God is designed for us like a promised land, a mansion with many rooms, where we'll just be like, here you go. You're all set. Everything's moved in. Welcome. And it'll just be like, finally, never again will I have to unpack. It's just nice to know where home is. And in this life, our home is often uprooted and moved around because as God moves us, or we find that we have to go different places. That's all part and part, I think, in some ways of like the sinful state of our world, that it is just more difficult, it needs to be. And again, we can point to Jacob and others who will go through that process where you think, wow, that is not ideal.
Yeah. This is going to sound like an unrelated question, but since you threw a little pop quiz at me with the AAA question, let me throw it at you.
Let's do it.
If you had an unlimited amount of money, what is one thing you would never purchase? Like you would never use twice?
Whoa, that is deep. Like,
it's really not. My answer is socks. I would never wear the same pair of socks twice. I would just always buy new socks.
Of all your socks?
Yeah, I would just always buy. I would always wear new socks. Okay. But the reason I'm asking, and I'll let you answer the question. The reason I'm asking is because after this move, I've never felt the feeling of maybe we should just leave all of our stuff there and buy all new stuff. If I had that ability, I would have just bought all new stuff and just moved it into the house.
Yeah.
But what would you, if you had an unlimited amount of money?
Lord, what a good question.
And also like this is the caveat. I feel like I'm channeling Les and Tanner's Would You Rather from back in the day. This is the caveat. There's no way to unwisely use your money. So like I've asked this question to people and like, well, I gotta be prudent with the money, even though it's still unlimited. Like it's still like there's no qualifications here. Like you have as much money as you want. You never need to worry about money. And there's no unwise way to use the money.
Gotcha. So it's basically zero judgment. Nobody's going to say, it was.
I mean, they might say it, but you don't care because you have infinite money.
Okay. So I think it's maybe you got in my head, but where I would go with that is I feel like I spend a lot of time ironing clothes.
Yeah.
And so like if the whole point was like I could wear a dress shirt and it would just like come into my closet like totally pristine and well pressed and like crisp, like the sleeves, like all of the creases were on point. And then somebody was like, well, you wear it once, but you'd have to iron it after that. But they said to me, but you could just pay for it to be another shirt, the same shirt. I would be like, that's fine.
Yeah. See, my thing about socks, this is the funniest thing. This is going to become the episode. I used to think I was really weird in this. that like I love a brand new pair of socks. Like it's a real problem. I would totally
fair.
spend my entire life savings on socks if I could do it and not starve to death. I was at the bank one time and I was trying not to eavesdrop on the people in front of me in line, but people talk
Okay.
loud and like you're standing
Yeah.
in line, you're bored. And the people in front of me were having the same conversation about how much they love a new pair of socks.
Really?
And absolutely the guy in front of me said, you know, if I had an unlimited amount of money, I would just never wear anything except brand new socks. And I was like, I thought I was the
Never
only
thought about
person. I felt heard. I felt seen.
Yeah, that's
I just felt like I was no longer. It's like one of the four loves from C.S. Lewis. Like there's someone out there that gets me.
yeah. I thought that was like what you were gonna say. One of the four love languages is like brand new socks all the time.
That's true. It's one of my love languages.
I mean, I know that there's like, yeah, I'm embracing the derail. So here we go, everybody. The train is about to come on the tracks. So are you talking about like, I know they're like special made socks where like, you know, like the seams are on the outside. Like, is this all part of this, like the comfort of the socks? But you're
No.
saying the feel, and I'm with you on this. And this is true of almost anything, especially clothing. The feel of like the brand new thing, the unbroken thing, the thing that's like never been worn before. The purity is a beautiful thing. It's just
Yeah.
about that. It's not about like the comfort.
No,
of
no,
it,
it's
like,
not. Yeah, it's
it's
not about
wool,
like it's
smart
not like
wool.
my fancy socks or anything like that. I'm wearing a pair of Hanes X Temp socks that I bought on Amazon for like 15 pairs for $20 or some crazy thing like that. That's what I'm talking about. Like I'm not talking about fancy like Bombas socks or anything like that. Not
Oh,
sponsored
nice.
by Bombas.
It's a good reference.
Although I would love some Bombas socks.
Yeah.
But like, and maybe it extends to like white t-shirts, like white
Yeah, I was
undershirts,
gonna say
brand new
that.
white undershirts,
Yeah.
or brand new white, like brand new underwear, really brand new any clothing. Maybe I should just extend and say I would never wear the same, like I would never wear anything except brand new clothing.
Yeah, that's fair.
The planet would fill up with old one-time worn clothing and we would all die. But
that's the thing. In this hypothetical world, there's no judgment. It's somehow as if that your actions didn't actually matter.
well, yeah, but also I have infinite money. So whatever the consequences are, I could Elon Musk it and build a company to send these socks into the sun if I need
Mars.
to. Yeah, like not to no, there's like we might colonize Mars someday. We don't want all my dirty socks.
Well, no, that's where they're making all the new socks.
Oh, like there's a factory on Mars?
Yes. Yeah.
Mars socks. That could be interesting. Okay.
Mars
Yeah.
socks. Mox.
I bet that wasn't on your bingo card.
I love this. See, we're fighting back.
Yeah.
You think that you know us. You don't know us at all. We ever talked about how we just like to wear brand new socks forever, which I think has got to be part of heaven.
We're going to do an episode where we intentionally try not to use any of our common phrases. And the internet is like the AI overlords are going to be like, I think someone has stolen your identity.
Yeah, that's true. Something will happen with that. The first thing is that we will alienate everybody who's ever listened to us and felt comforted or comfortable with our voices.
It's true.
The second is we'll get a whole new audience
It's
who will
true.
immediately disappear in the subsequent episode when we
It's
return
true.
to ourselves.
It's true. Well, enough about my sock obsession. I think we're on your denial, I think is where we're at now.
I think you're correct. I'm going to say we got less than 2 minutes to keep this on a 30-minute mark. Here we go. So as I already teased, so this afternoon, it was about, so this is the Lord's Day for us. I don't know what day it is for you as you're listening to this, but our Lord's Day service had ended. I was with some people. We were going over some last minute musical things, wrapping some things up. And because of that, because I'm often at church a little bit earlier than my wife for practice for music through worship, we drive separately. My wife, she came up to me at about 12:15 after she had done her thing and chatted with a million people because she's super popular. She said to me, I'm going home, but I'm stopping at the grocery store first. I said, okay. And then she went on her way. About 20 minutes later, while I was still yet at the church, I looked at my phone and realized I'd missed a couple calls from her. And then she was calling me again. And she said, I picked up the phone and said, are you all right? She said, the car battery is dead and I'm at the food store parking lot. She said, I already called the 3 A's. She actually said AAA, but in this story, I'm calling it 3 A's. And they are on their way. So I said, all right, fine. That's perfect. I will come and meet you. So I met her and we chatted for a bit. We hung out. And again, AAA is amazing. You get to see the vehicle that's coming to rescue you, as it were, Yeshua you, and always spiritual on this podcast. And they showed up And the gentleman was very nice, as they often are. And we had a chat about the battery. And he said, well, let me test it. He does all the stuff. And he says, he goes into the car, he opens it up, like the car horn goes off, like, that kind of like signal that somebody's trying to enter your vehicle and they shouldn't be. And so he says, all right, let me test it. And then he goes, oh man, you're not going anywhere. That's the way he starts. He goes, you're not going anywhere. And for I should say this thing as well. AAA, if you have like a battery issue, disclose that in your like what you think is like your problem. They show up with a truck that has like batteries. It's like a battery buffet. And they just put a new one in, you pay for it, and it's like you go on your way. So he goes, yeah, you're not going anywhere. He said, your battery is actually like fully charged. What you have here is your starter is gone. He's like, the way you can tell is if like your horn or your alarm system is going off, obviously you still have power. If you try to turn over the key and you don't get any clicking, that's actually a sign that the battery's fine and that starts it. So he said, unfortunately, I can't help you. You're going to put in another request to have the car towed. So we're like, fine. So we put in a second request to the 3As to have the car towed. And we get a response immediately says, we will come and help you within 90 minutes. So sure, about around 90 minutes, this gentleman shows up who is fantastic, super friendly, very kind. He has a flatbed truck, makes it look very easy. Again, we're in a grocery store parking lot. So like this guy rolls in like all hot, backs in, like throws down the bed. And it's like a thing to behold. I'm like really stressed about the situation. And my wife's like, he's a professional. Just let him do what he does. So he throws down the bed. He hops out of the truck. He's already putting the chains on the bottom. And he says, like, you guys, I saw you guys need me to tow this to your dealership or your garage. He said, you're all set if you want to leave. And I was like, are you sure you don't want us here at all? And he goes, get out of here. You've waited long enough. And I was like, finally, like at that point, we've been waiting 3.5 hours, like all told through this whole process. It's just how it goes, right? So I was like, that's fantastic. So we pull out of the parking lot. I see in the rearview mirror, he's hauling up the car. And of course, as he said, he needs the key. He says, I need to get into the car because I need to put it in neutral. He's doing his thing. Of course, the open door, I can hear in the background the horn going off again, of course, that signal. And so we're in a lane. We're at a light to turn and to go home. All of a sudden, my phone is ringing. I throw it to my wife. She answers it. And I can hear the guy through the speaker say, do you guys want to come back and get your car now? And my wife is like, what do you mean? And he's like, yeah, it's running. Why don't you come back and get your car? So somebody has already picked up on the punchline of the story. And that is that somehow, and this is nobody's fault, but somehow, some way, my wife inadvertently got the car in anti-theft mode. And so anti-theft mode means that, of course, if you put the key in the ignition and try to turn it over, it will not start because it thinks it is being stolen.
Yeah.
So here we were in the grocery store parking lots, having lots of great time together. And so I guess I'm denying against, like, it's possible that no matter how much you just don't know enough. And we didn't know anything. And this guy was super kind. He was actually more upset that the previous AAA or 3A's person didn't know that like this particular quote unquote trick. So he was like, oh, I'm going to let them know. And I was like, no. I think it's fine. Like, he was very helpful and very kind. He was like, oh, I've told him before. So like, it was like a whole thing. He was like, he's a new guy and he needs to know that, like, here's the trick. She's like, just lock and unlock and you'll be totally fine. But so it's a bit like, listen, providence, and by that I mean God does what God wants to do. And for whatever reason, he saw it fit for my wife and I to spend a lot of quality time together in a grocery store parking lot, sitting in our other vehicle while we waited for 3.5 hours through various means to just wait for somebody to show up to tell us, hey, dummies,
Everything's
how much
fine.
you lock and unlock your car? And he was so kind, but it was like one of those things where it's like, we perceive your subtext, sir. Because he was like, at one point he actually said to me, he's like, you heard like the horn going off, right? Like when you tried to get into the car, every time you got in and out, you heard it going off, right? And I was like, yes. But like, in my defense, I thought it was the battery, which had happened before. And then your other guy shows up and tells me, hey, it's definitely a starter. So like, I was totally biased. I was totally in another world, but you know what? In the end of the day, it was all good. And here we are. And we avoided paying for a starter, which sometimes feels like we've saved money, even though that's not really the case.
It's true. Well, in the interest of time, since we're way past the 30 minutes allocated for affirmations and denials, it's amazing that we allocate 30 minutes for affirmations and denials. This is like the segue of the century. Since you're talking about you and your wife spending quality time in the parking lot, we can talk about the Scots Confession here about Adam and his wife spending some quality time in the garden and also being dummies. So let's just read Scots Confession chapter 2 here. We're starting off on this series here. We're in this second chapter. We're planning on at least one episode per chapter, although some of the chapters are a little bit longer, so we may spill into a second episode on those. And we've commented last week on how the order of theology in the Scots Confession is slightly different in some ways and significantly different in other ways from things like the Westminster Confession or the London Baptist Confession, which we're most familiar with, or even something like the Belgic Confession, which I think our audience is familiar with but less familiar with. Those all follow basically the same order of theology, but the Scots Confession does it a little bit differently. So we're going to read chapter 2 here, which is of the creation of man. And I'm going to just point out before we read it, in this section here, the creation of man, they comment on the fall itself as part of the creation, which is very interesting.
Yes.
We'll unpack that a little bit here. So chapter 2 of the Scots Confession of the creation of man, it says, "We confess and acknowledge this our God to have created man, to wit, our first father Adam, to his own image and similitude," Genesis 1 and 2, "to whom he gave wisdom, lordship, justice, free will, and clear knowledge of himself, so that in the whole nature of man there could be noted no imperfection, from which honor and perfection man and women both did fall," Genesis 3, "the woman being deceived by the serpent, the man obeying the voice of the woman, both conspiring against the sovereign majesty of God, who in express words had before threatened death if they presumed to eat of the forbidden fruit." So the Scots Confession, as we said last week, it follows sort of like this different order of theology. And so we started with the nature of God. And although we didn't get too much into it, because honestly, like the Scots Confession is just really vanilla theology proper. So we talked most of last week about like the nature of the Scots Confession and the historical situatedness. But going from the doctrine of God directly into the doctrine of the creation of man, that's a little bit strange. But then including within the creation of man, the fall itself is even a little bit more strange. So I think even just like starting off, we're seeing that the Scots Confession is just approaching things differently than what we're used to with things like the Westminster or the London Baptist.
Yeah, I like this though, right? It almost puts at the forefront, I like you already stole my point, that this idea that the creation of man and the fall, as it were all again part of this predestination, this foreordained plan of God. So that there is kind of impounded in this, that there is no plan B. This is all plan A. And I love that in that second phrase, that when he's speaking of this creation, he's speaking about the characteristics and the qualities which God imbued his creation with, that is humanity, wisdom, lordship, justice, free will, clear knowledge of himself. So that in the whole nature of man, there could not be noted no imperfection. So we have this almost idyllic, well, very much an idyllic starting place.
Yeah.
That here is all the things. And at the same time, then, what I love about this is I've read elsewhere that like the Scots Confession just doesn't pull any punches. So I love vanilla. And while it's plain vanilla, there's something great about that. That there's like a purity, there's a deliciousness. There's something that is like the essence of the thing represented in its highest facet, in its most exalted state. And I think that's what you get here. So when you get then to this idyllic state that's proclaimed here, then there must be this like contravening, like this contradistinction, which there is this conspiring against the sovereign majesty of God, which doesn't put any varnish on this. If everything is perfect, then any kind of deviation from that perfection must be volitional, because we've already stated the Scots Confession is talking about free will and a clear knowledge of who God is. So then the only reasonable explanation, which is the absolute truth, is that there is some kind of conspiring against the sovereign majesty of God. So again, not even just against the covenant or as covenant breakers. Here again, we find the Scots Confession coming to us with, again, turning over that jewel in the hand and seeing as it like reflecting that light from a slightly different angle, but it still is the jewel. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, one of the things that I latched onto, so last week we kind of latched on to this phrase that because of who God is, we are obligated to cleave to him. We kind of latched onto that phrase. There's another phrase in here that I think is interesting in a similar fashion. Is, the Westminster tradition, when we talk about what the image of God is or how God created man, we typically think knowledge, righteousness, and holiness. Like that's the language of the catechism. And obviously that's here. Like wisdom is kind of parallel to knowledge. Justice is kind of parallel to righteousness. And the idea of like holiness, that's all embedded here. But lordship, like that's a phrase, although the Westminster Catechism say that God created man in knowledge, righteousness, and holiness with dominion over the creatures, it seems and feels a little different to say he created them with lordship.
Right.
And this is the interesting part. In the Westminster tradition, at least as I read it, dominion over the creatures feels like something added to man. I don't know whether I haven't done enough study to know whether that's like the intention of the authors, but the way that it's phrased, created them in knowledge, righteousness, and holiness with dominion over the creatures. It feels like that's something that's added to man in almost in like an auxiliary role. In the Scots Confession, lordship is fundamental to the nature of what it means to be human. So we're created with wisdom, lordship, justice, free will, and a clear knowledge of himself. That's all built into what it means to be human. All of those things is built into what Adam had that is fundamental to his nature. And we'll see in the next section here on original sin. And this is what I think is so fascinating is like the section on original sin and the fall of man are separated in sections, which just feels really weird. But those things that are fundamental to man are lost in the fall. We lose the wisdom that we are granted. We lose lordship. We lose justice. In a real sense, we lose free will.
Yes.
We're not really free. We're now bound by sin. So although we're not compelled to sin, we're no longer free not to sin, right? We're obligated. We're not obligated. We are constrained by our own fallen natures to sin. We also lose the clear knowledge of God. These things are so fundamental to what it means to be human in the Scots Confession that they come at this point where like it's I don't know how else to say it, like this is what it means to be human. And I don't think we often think of those other things we maybe do think of, especially in the Westminster tradition. They're really explicit in the confession. They use different language, but it's the same ideas. But this concept of lordship and dominion over creation, I think that's not something we recognize that we regain as redeemed Christians who are now regenerated and are being remade into the image of Christ. We participate in that lordship that Christ has as the second Adam over the creation. And I think this is an insight that you don't get just from reading the Westminster, that this is so fundamental to what it is or what it means to be human. And the fact that it's fundamental to what it means to be human means that it is in some sense fundamental to what it means to be a redeemed, restored, and regenerated human as well.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I haven't thought about that until you said it. But what really struck me was that in my own processing of this, I've often conferred dominion with an outworking of a particular status or stat that's outside of that dominion. So in other words, if humanity is exalted, lifted up by way of strength or knowledge, proficiency or ability, acumen, then because of that, they do exercise dominion. But here, what we're saying that's influenced is this idea that in a different way, like lordship is a title or authority, a hierarchy automatically bestowed outside of the characteristics that might necessitate it. So here it is to be human is to have lordship, to be perfectly human, to be human in the way that God intended is not just to have lordship, but to be a lord over all things, which might perceive or like might actually confer that it, like right now we think about like take dominion. You need a verb in front of that because it's difficult to have dominion. What if instead it was easy because you are already a lord and therefore, you know what lords have? They have lordship.
Right.
So like in their perfection, God has established it as thus, almost as if like lordship was an office and it's conferred because this is the privileged state and the blessed opportunity of those whom God has put in this, again, like really high and exalted state. when we lost that, when we forsook it, when we failed to follow through with that prohibitionary period, then what happens is even lordship becomes like corrupt and perverted. Instead, now it's just to take a lordship over something else, is to abuse, to exercise power and authority that isn't your own, or to do so in a way in which you are pushing down or forcing others to yield before you who ought not to, at least in that particular way. So I'm totally with you. I think there is like a status and a state here that is conferred in this particular confession that we just don't get elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Just maybe by way of comparison, here's what the Westminster Confession, and this is the 1646 version, or 1646, although I don't think it was changed. Here's what the Westminster reads in a sort of parallel section. This is chapter 4 on creation, section 2, which deals with the creation of man. It says, after God had made all other creatures, he created man, male and female, with reasonable and immortal souls, endued them with knowledge, righteousness, and true holiness after his image, having the law of God written in their hearts, the power to fulfill it, yet under the possibility of transgressing, being left to the liberty of their own will, which was subject unto change. Besides this law written in their hearts, they received a command not to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which while they kept, they were happy in their communion with God and had dominion over the creatures. So like the concept of dominion is in the Westminster Confession,
Right.
but it is not so clearly integrated with the very nature of humanity as it is in the Scots Confession. I think there's probably room within the Westminster tradition to hold a view where this dominion over other creatures is fundamental to humanity. But I also think there's room within the Westminster tradition to see that as an accidental characteristic, right? Because this, I don't know, I've not reflected on this enough to know whether I think this is good or bad, right? But the difference between these confessions is that to fail to exercise lordship, according to the Scots Confession, to fail to exercise lordship is to fail to be fully human, right?
Yes.
That's what we're saying.
Right.
In the Westminster Confession, that may be true. I think you could hold a view within the Westminster Confession, within the words of that holds that. But I also think you could hold a view within the Westminster, the sort of like the constraints of the language. You could hold a view to say that to fail to hold dominion may be a deficiency in office, or maybe like a failure to fulfill your obligation or to live up to your potential or whatever. So however you want to phrase that, but it doesn't necessarily represent a failure to be fully human the way it must in the language of the Scots Confession. And I think this is just a really good example of how the Scots Confession, that's now the second or third time. I feel like we need to now, somebody who listens to the show has the ability to make candy and has to make something called the Scots Confession. I don't know what it would be, but I'm expecting some in the mail. The Scots Confession requires, on the face of it, that you hold that dominion over the creatures, dominion over other creatures, lordship is so fundamental to human nature that to fail to exercise lordship properly, right? All of the qualifications that we would need to put on that. To fail to do so means you're not actually fully human. You're not being fully human. You're departing from what it means to be human if you fail to properly exercise lordship. And this was not planned, because we don't plan any of this, but like Jesse and his wife sitting in the parking lot, in some ways like being mocked by their car.
Right.
Like their car is doing what it was designed to do, but is in some ways kind of like outsmarting Jesse and Jen. Not to like be insulting. I'm not trying to be insulting to you two. I'm sure
it's fine.
You're not the only people that this has happened to.
We learned a lot today.
Like the car is outsmarting Jesse and Jen with this anti-theft thing. That's an example of what the Scots Confession would say. Like, that's not lordship, right?
Right.
And there are probably like there's a handful of Christian nationalists listening to our episode. They're like, yeah, let's do it. Take dominion. I'm not holding that position. That's not what I'm saying. But this understanding, maybe I am becoming a Christian nationalist in real time. I don't think I am, but like the idea that we just let reality happen to us, and that like as Christians, we just let it come our way and we just sort of take it. I'm becoming more and more opposed to that idea. Now, I don't think that like taking over the government and like creating these Christian towns like Moscow, Idaho, like I don't think that's the way we do this. But the idea that like we just sort of let it happen and we don't push back in any sense, I'm really beginning to feel like that's not what the Bible teaches. And I think the Scots Confession, and this goes to what we talked about, like the Scots Confession, I can't stop saying it, Jesse.
So close.
The Scots Confession has no concept of the separation of church and state. There's no concept within it of that idea, at least not on the face of it. I just feel like this is another example where like that's part of this, like a king ruling over Scotland, exercising lordship in a proper way. That's just what it means to be human in a certain sense.
Yes.
And to be under that lordship and to exercise your own lordship within your own spheres. That's what it means to be human. And I think there's something to that.
Yeah, I agree. Well, of course, like we see in Christ, who is truly God and truly man, the second, the last, the better Adam, that part of like his miracle work of course, having all the elements submit to him is in equal parts representation of his deity. That is, that he is God, and also that he is truly man, that all of these things submit to him in the way that
Yeah.
they were meant to be. And so in the same way, I think that's absolutely right. Like you and I talked about before, that sometimes when we think about dominion, we just think of like the physical realities of our world, like how
Right.
it's hard to toil, and that, of course, if you plant a garden, it's difficult, but how much more so everything else. So like the command of knowledge, the command of intellect, the wanting to know more, to apply more, to have wisdom and to apply that onto your work, that itself is difficult. And to be truly human is to have command over all these things, like the domain in which you live,
Yeah.
to be Lord over that domain and to use it effectively and with wisdom and with great productivity. So like everything you do is efficacious, and everything we do is not efficacious, as of course, again, witnessed by the fact that I spent a long time waiting on a vehicle this afternoon that was doing the thing, like you said, that was supposed to do. If we had just known that thing,
Yeah.
everything else, we were just going to on with our lives and move forward. So I think you're totally right, that what God had envisioned, I think maybe what is for us in the new heaven and the new earth, is one point in which the new heaven and the new earth is completely submissive and yields to a complete understanding and then a proper application of that understanding onto wisdom, so that we lord over all things in a way that is productive and useful and respectable and full of accountability and worships God first and foremost. So I think that what we have embodied here is this idea that all of life was meant to, in its original conception, to fall underneath this elated and high level status that God creates when he puts forward humanity.
Yeah.
And that we've lost so much of that, so that we are really all dummies in so many ways because of sin. And part of that being a dummy is that we don't have command and lordship over the things which we are meant to have command and lordship over, where that's like our physical place, the way in which we try to grow and produce food, the way in which we understand knowledge or apply knowledge, our memories,
Yeah.
the things that we learn. All of this stuff has been compromised to such a great degree, where we were always meant to be lords. And in that way, we're meant, of course, to exemplify and to model our Lord, who is the Lord Jesus Christ, who is over all these things and commands them with perfection.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we'll talk about this more next week, because in some ways this article and the next article kind of blend together, because, the discussion of the fall of man and then the discussion of original sin, like that's part and parcel of the same thing. But there's some really interesting concepts and phrases here. So the first, from which honor and perfection man and women both did fall.
Right.
Like we I think unwittingly sometimes conceptualize the fall as like a natural consequence of some imperfection that was, within man. That's like a hangover from Roman Catholicism. That's more or less the
Right.
Roman Catholic view, is that like God created man and he added something to them that would cause them not to fall. And then he withdrew that in some sense, and then they fell. The Scots Confession has no room for that nonsense. And the Westminster doesn't either, but it's more explicit in this, that it's not just from a state of like original neutrality that man and women fell. It's from honor and perfection that man and women fell.
Yes.
And then to sort of like underscore this more, it's not just that they sort of naively fell or they didn't know any better or it was some sort of silly mistake, but they conspired against the sovereignty the sovereign majesty of God. Like, I don't think we often recognize, and this is the logical conclusion from the idea that man had perfect knowledge or clear knowledge of God, right? He had clear knowledge of who God was, what was expected of him. We can't ever look to something that God did not provide for Adam as the source of the reason for Adam's fall. Now, there's a big mystery as to like how a human who is in this state with this knowledge ever falls. I don't think we're ever going to resolve that. We're never going to know that answer, at least not this side of glory. But it wasn't just an innocent, naive fall, at least according to the Scots Confession. Well, maybe we'll unpack this more and talk about whether we buy this or not. It was an active conspiracy against God's sovereignty. So I think we often think of Eve as like this innocent person who was deceived. And so like maybe we kind of feel like it wasn't really fully her fault. I actually had a college professor who talked about how like Adam and Eve didn't know what a lie was. So how would they possibly know that the serpent was being deceptive? That's just a lie. That itself is a lie from the pit of hell, right? Adam and Eve had clear knowledge of who God was. They had clear knowledge of what was expected of them. And so to then turn against God requires a conspiracy against him. And again, we can maybe talk about whether or not we buy this or whether we would take a different approach or whether we would soften this. But at least as far as the Scots Confession is concerned, this was not just an accidental fall, but in a very real sense, it was an intentional rebellion and fall from God's position they had placed him in, right? And this goes back to what we were talking about with lordship. They were given lordship. They were expected to exercise lordship. And so then to now oppose God who had given them that lordship requires an act of conspiracy, not just sort of like an innocent mistake or a misunderstanding or anything like that. It really does need to be understood as an intentional conspiracy, kind of pushing against God's lordship. It's not just a matter of like, I made a mistake or I did something wrong. It's an intentional rebellion. And I love that that the Scots Confession uses the word conspiracy, because it's not just like an in the moment, like a crime of passion, right? It's a thought out issue. So this takes in Genesis where it says that the woman saw that the food was good to eat, that it was good to make one wise, all the different characteristics. That's no longer just like, this seems like a tasty piece of fruit that has some benefits.
Right.
This is a well thought out plan. This is a conspiratorial decision to oppose the Lord of the universe, rather than sort of like what I think most evangelicals think. And I think because most of our audience and myself, I would put myself in this category, are sort of evangelicals coming out of that context into a Reformed context. We think of the fall more as like an accident, where the Scots Confession at least is presenting it much more as like a plan that the first humans took or underwent.
Which we should understand almost better, right? That we ourselves are the kind of people that have this clenched fist even now toward God, that we want to be selfish, that we want our own way. So I like that too, because of course, like conspiring means literally like to breathe together.
Right.
So there is this idea that all that happened was that this situation of the fruit presented the opportunity to act on the thing that maybe was present at least for some time previous to that moment, or antecedent to that moment, which was, if we could just have our own way, if we could get the knowledge that we wanted, if we could be above God or be equals with him, if such an opportunity presented itself, then we would go forward with it. I actually think like that's the root of almost all sin.
Right.
That for most of us, the place that we are comfortable with is that if we could do a sin and get away with it so nobody would know, we would probably do that thing. And so here we find in our forefathers the very thing that we exemplify almost every day. So we are just like them in that way, but it's that intent again. So it's, again, if I just had opportunity, but I could get away with it, I would probably do that thing.
Yeah.
And so I think the Scots Confession, again, it just doesn't pull any punches. Like it comes out hot, and opposed to just saying, well, listen, this is a horrible fall that took place. This almost seems to imply this is a premeditated act.
Yeah.
And the opportunity presented itself, and Adam and Eve walked willingly and volitionally and with great initiative into this moment because they were prepared in some way to say, if such a time presented itself, we would act in this way because we were prepared for it and we decided to move in this direction.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe just by way of comparison as we close out here. And again, I don't think that anything that is being said in the Scots Confession here is incompatible with what is being said in the Westminster Confession.
For
It's
sure.
different than what's being said, but not necessarily incompatible. So here, just by way of
Right.
comparison, here's what chapter 6, section 1 of the Westminster says. Our first parents, being seduced by the subtlety and temptation of Satan, sinned in eating the forbidden fruit. This their sin God was pleased according to his wise and holy counsel to permit, having purposed it according to his own glory. So like even that subtle difference, right? In the Scots Confession, it acknowledges that the woman was deceived, but the Westminster seems to place, at least in my read of it, it puts a lot more onus on what Satan did in this process. Satan seduced them. It wasn't just that he deceived them, he seduced them. Now, and that includes Adam, right? So there's a whole different element of the Scots Confession sort of parses out that the reason Eve fell is different than the reason that Adam fell. Again, not incompatible, but different. The Scots Confession is making Adam and Eve's decision much more of an active decision on their part by talking about it as a conspiracy. It's not even a conspiracy with the serpent in the Scots Confession. It's a conspiracy basically that the man and woman engaged in to conspire against the sovereign majesty of God.
Right.
So we'll unpack some of that more next time because we're gonna have to backtrack into this portion of the confession to move forward into the next. But I just think, and again, I'm so excited to continue going through the Scots Confession because this is a major confession in our tradition that doesn't get as much attention as it deserves. And there are these questions that it brings up that I think are really fruitful for us to think through. Because again, these are not things that I don't think there's anything we're going to find in the Westminster or in the Scots Confession. I keep on doing it. The Scots Confession that, and now that it's in my head, I can't stop. I should just embrace it. This is now the Scots Confession. I don't think we're going to find anything that is outright incompatible, that are outright contradictory. But what we are going to find is that the difference in perspective is significant enough that we have to grapple with it. And we may not be able to fully embrace the Scots Confession unless we adjust some of our expectations and some of our perspectives, which we don't need to do. Maybe the Scots Confession is wrong, right? This is a human document. It was written by one guy and then sort of adopted by the Church of Scotland. Maybe it's not right, and that's fine. But I think we have to grapple with those questions in a way we haven't before.
Yeah. So here's what we learned for sure on this episode. First, again, the Scots Confession calls us to process, debate, think about some things. Maybe principally one of those things, at least in the second article, is it possible that Adam and Eve wanted to be deceived or are willing to be deceived? And so as a result of that, willingly, volitionally walked into this sin.
Yeah.
We've also learned, Tony, you got a new house, and that's fantastic. And we've also definitely learned that it's possible that you should just leave all of your vehicles unlocked, because even if somebody tries to steal them, they won't be able to, because even when you have the key, you can't get them to stop.
It's true. It's true. We've also learned that of all of the confessions, apparently the Scots Confession is the sweetest, because I can't stop calling it the Scots Confection.
But somebody should do that, right? Somebody's already created like testaments, you know, like
Yeah.
those mints that have like the wrapper has like a Bible or something.
Yeah.
Why not the Scots Confection? I like to think it would have a large amount of like star anise in it. Like it would be black licorice style. That's to me what I envision. I don't know what you think of like the Scots Confection it tastes like.
I don't know. I'm just going to drop this and then we have to end the episode because it's already like 9:00 at night and I'm falling asleep here. I found out the other day that they sell Necco wafers at the deli at my hospital. So I'm feeling like the Scots Confection. I didn't. No, I'm waiting. I'm waiting until we can partake together.
Okay.
The Scots Confection maybe is like Necco wafers, but maybe like bitter because it's Scots. Yeah.
That could be true. Like it says like this is a dessert, but you eat it and it just smacks you in the mouth.
It's true.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to do that together sometime. We're just going to get a package of Necco wafers.
Yeah. The next time you're in town, I'm just going to buy some at work and maybe I'll buy them now. They probably last forever. And then we'll just eat them together on the air. It'll be fun.
Yeah, I've heard, honestly, the ones that are in, like, your CVS or your local grocery, they were made in, like, 1836.
It's
They
true.
never go bad.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Jesse, I know that we normally have a whole host of announcements to do at the end of an episode, but I think
No
we're just
need.
going to skip that this week. Executive decision that I just made right now.
Well done.
And Jesse, until next time, honor everyone.
Love the brotherhood.